I never expected a piece of timber and chicken wire to spark a neighborhood battle royale, but when Karen marched across my lawn in her stretched polo shirt and demanded I dismantle the bear-proof fence I'd built to protect my orchard, she lit the fuse on a confrontation that would leave her humiliated and me vindicated. The sun had just peeked over the treetops that Saturday, and I was sipping coffee on my porch when I saw her storm up my driveway, pearls bouncing, eyes aflame with entitlement. She pointed a finger at my handiwork, a sturdy barrier reinforced with steel mesh, and barked about bylaws and neighborhood aesthetics, as though she'd been appointed fashion police of our cul-de-sac. I listened in silence, the morning birdsong swallowed by her rant about unsightly structures and property value plummets. My response was simple. I handed her a copy of the county regulations proving my fence was entirely within code, then watched her mouth drop open as her carefully rehearsed speech dissolved into stunned silence. That was the first twist. As Karen sputtered, "Another neighbor, Mrs. Vasquez," across the street stepped out, holding aloft her phone. She recorded the meltdown in glorious high definition, and I realized this wasn't just about a fence. It was about power, privilege, and the smug assumption that her HOA presidency gave her license to bully anyone who dared challenge her. In the days that followed, I dug into the truth behind Karen's crusade. Rumor had it she'd accepted under-the-table donations from a developer eager to clear my land for a cookie-cutter condo project. So I filed public records requests, unearthed emails linking her to clandestine meetings, and assembled a dossier that laid bare her scheme to strong-arm the entire street into approval. When I confronted her at the monthly HOA meeting, she tried to play innocent, tossing pithy retorts about community standards and the greater good. That was when I dropped the bombshell. I revealed her emails, projected them on the big screen, and watched as her smug smile curdled into panic. The room fell silent. Residents exchanged gasps, before some of her staunch supporters turned away in shame. The so-called guardian of our neighborhood suddenly looked like a self-serving con artist on stage, and I realized the real battle was only just beginning. Late that night, I found an unexpected ally in my next-door neighbor, Marcus, a burly carpenter who'd quietly admired my fence's craftsmanship. He'd witnessed Karen's antics before. When he heard of my plan, he offered evidence of other shady dealings, like the time Karen had fined him for parking his truck on his own driveway. Together, we devised a counterstrike that would seal her fate. On the morning of the big HOA vote, we rallied the neighborhood with flyers detailing Karen's corruption, plastering them on doors and lampposts. At dawn, I positioned that rustic wooden sign, bold letters, under 50-characters on my lawn. Bare fence stands, no excuses. It became a rallying cry. By midday, the lawn was dotted with homemade signs echoing the message. When Karen arrived, ready to gavel through her final insult, she was met instead by a crowd chanting, "Justice for the fence." Her face went pale as she surveyed the unified front of homeowners who had once cowered at her threats. The climactic showdown unfolded in a packed community hall. Karen rose to speak, but her words faltered under the weight of our collective gaze. I stepped to the podium, heart pounding, and recounted every slight, every bribe she'd taken, every attempt to silence dissent. I told them how I'd built that bare fence out of respect for the wildlife in my property, not for vanity or profit. I spoke of community trust, accountability, and the courage to stand up against bullies. By the time I finished, shouts of approval filled the room. Karen tried one last desperate plea, her voice cracking, but it fell flat. A motion was called, a vote was taken, and the result was unanimous. Karen was stripped of her HOA presidency and fined for her illicit conduct. The room erupted in applause, and I felt a surge of vindication I'd never experienced before. In the aftermath, Karen slunk away like a wounded animal, chased not by bears but by the very neighbors she had ruled with an iron fist. Her name became synonymous with hypocrisy and greed. Local papers picked up the story, and soon the tale of the Bare Fence Rebellion went viral. People beyond our cul-de-sac praised the David versus Goliath victory, and I received messages from strangers inspired to stand up in their own communities. As for me, I marched back to my orchard, picked a ripe apple and took a bite. It tasted sweeter than any victory lap. And before I returned inside, I set one final sign by the fence. "Speak up, stand strong." The day after the HOA vote, I woke before dawn again. But this time it wasn't to prepare for battle, it was to savor the calm that follows a storm. The birds were warbling their soft greetings, and dew clung to the fence wire like tiny crystals. I ran my hand along the smooth steel mesh, recalling every hammer strike, every calculated measurement that went into building this barrier, and felt a swell of pride that went deeper than any fleeting triumph. Word had spread beyond our Culsic local radio crews showed up on pavement creaking wheels, their microphones thrust toward neighbors eager to share how they'd felt bullied for years, afraid to speak up until someone dared stand tall against Karen's petty tyranny. I let Mrs. Vasquez take the lead, her trembling voice cracking as she described Karen's intimidation tactics, and how she'd silenced dissent by threatening fines and legal action. When the reporter asked for my side, I simply pointed at the fence and said, "This isn't just about keeping bears out, it's about keeping fear out." The camera clicked, and I could feel our community's story being rewritten in real time. Over the next week, articles appeared in suburban newsletters and online forums, each headline more dramatic than the last. HOA Queen falls. Bear fence becomes symbol of resistance. Neighbors unite to oust corrupt leader. I watched metrics climb on my own social media. Messages of support from strangers in towns I'd never heard of drifting into my inbox like autumn leaves. Some offered resources, legal advice on HOA reform, introductions to activist groups campaigning for homeowners' rights, even invitations to speak at community workshops. It felt surreal. What began as a simple act of self-defense had mushroomed into a movement for accountability and transparency. And yet, amid the fanfare, I felt the need to ground myself. I invited every family on the street to a picnic under our giant oak, serving lemonade in mason jars and trays of my mother's famous apple crisp. Laughter floated above the clink of glass, and for the first time in years, there was no tension at the end of our lawns, no whispered meetings behind closed doors. We were a community reborn. As summer ripened toward its peak, I discovered a surprising lesson. Justice, once served, requires tending. I organized a neighborhood committee to redraft our HOA bylaws, stripping away vague clauses that Karen had exploited and replacing them with clear procedures for member input, term limits for officers, and transparent financial reporting. Volunteers pored over legal templates at kitchen tables, comparing drafts and debating language until our new policies felt like a living promise, rather than a dusty rulebook. We held an open forum in my garage, projector flickering against plywood walls, and invited a county official to explain the legal framework that shelters both communal harmony and individual rights. Watching my neighbors engage, once timid, now emboldened, filled me with a hope I hadn't known possible in a place so long defined by fear. Meanwhile, Karen disappeared from public view. Rumors circulated that she'd moved out of state to escape the shame. Others said she was appealing her fines or seeking to overturn the vote in court. I won't pretend I didn't smile at the thought of her frantic letters to attorneys, her frantic pleas to sympathetic ears. But when I learned she'd filed a lawsuit against the HOA alleging defamation and procedural errors, something shifted in me. I realized that my victory had never been about humiliating her. It had been about protecting my home, my neighbors, and the principle that no one is above the rules they enforce. So I offered to meet with her, face to face, on neutral ground, a local mediation center staffed by volunteer conciliators skilled in defusing conflicts. Some of my friends shook their heads at my decision, calling me naive or merciful to a fault. Yet I felt compelled. If I claimed to fight for justice, I couldn't abandon the humanity of my adversary, however deep her transgressions. When the day arrived, I sat across from Karen at a circular table in a pastel-lit room, its walls covered in soothing pastoral prints. She looked tired, her usual armor of confidence chipped away by weeks of legal headaches and social exile. I offered her a bottled water, and she accepted it without a word. For the first few minutes, we circled the issues like wary animals, neither willing to make the initial concession. Then I spoke. "I'm sorry our conflict escalated the way it did." Her eyes flicked up, surprise mingled with suspicion. "You're sorry," she echoed. I nodded. "I'm sorry we couldn't resolve this before it exploded. I regret that you felt threatened, but I hope you can see why I felt I had to stand my ground." She uncapped her bottle, swallowed a gulp, and exhaled. "I thought I was protecting our neighborhood," she admitted, voice low. "I never meant to hurt anyone. I was scared of change." In that confession, I saw the fear that had driven her, a fear of losing control, of irrelevance, of hidden motivations. We talked for hours, untangling resentment from responsibility, agreeing on common ground. Both of us loved this street, its maple-shaded sidewalks and laughter echoing between driveways. By the end, we drafted a simple accord. Karen would drop her lawsuit, retract her public statements about being defamed, and commit to abiding by the new bylaws. In exchange, the HOA would forgive her fines and provide a pathway for her to rejoin community activities, though she'd relinquish any leadership role for at least a year. Walking out of the mediation center, I felt the weight of months lift from my shoulders. I'd faced off against a bully, rallied my neighbors, overhauled a corrupt system, and still found a way to offer compassion. That afternoon, I returned home to adjust a loose fence rail, smiling as children on bicycles slowed to admire the sturdy barrier. A teenager with a camera phone snapped a photo and asked, "Can I post this? It's epic." I nodded. "Just tag it Bare Fence Rebellion." He grinned and sped off. Behind me, the wooden sign read its simple truth: "Bare Fence stands no excuses." But I'd added a little note beneath in white chalk: "Community stands stronger together." It wasn't as punchy, but it felt more honest. Weeks later, our story caught the attention of a regional documentary crew, exploring grassroots activism in suburban America. They wanted to film interviews, reenactments, B-roll of me hammering in fence posts and neighbors signing the new bylaws. I hesitated. My life had been under a microscope, and I'd grown protective of my privacy. Yet I thought of the spark we'd ignited here and realized that sharing our journey could empower others to challenge injustice in their own backyards. So I agreed. Over the next month, cameras traced our meetings, captured tearful apologies at the mediation center, and recorded the laughter and camaraderie of our post-conflict block parties. When the finished documentary premiered at a community center in the county seat, the room crackled with energy. Viewers leaned forward as they recognized familiar landmarks, nodded at the universal pangs of neighborly strife, and erupted into applause when they saw our signs waving defiantly across screen. As autumn settled in, I hosted a final gathering at my orchard to celebrate the one-year anniversary of our victory. Apple trees blushed with fruit, and the crisp air carried the scent of cinnamon and wood smoke. Neighbors brought pies and cider. Children chased each other around hay bales. I read excerpts from the message board where it all began, as though reading an ancient prophecy fulfilled. Karen attended, silent but present, and later approached me to say, "Thank you for giving me a second chance." I patted her shoulder and said, "We all deserve that." The crowd cheered. And in that moment, I understood that the bare fence was never just a barrier, it was a catalyst for unity, a testament to courage, a reminder that even the smallest structure can hold up the loftiest ideals. Looking back, I see the bare fence not as a line drawn in the dirt, but as an invitation to draw lines in the ground between fear and hope, apathy and action. My orchard stands protected, but more importantly, our community stands protected from silence, from complacency, from the belief that one person's whim should outweigh the voices of many. The fence remains, weathering storms and bearing witness to laughter, picnics, and the occasional curious raccoon. And every morning when light filters through the mesh and dances on the grass, I remember. Real strength lies not in driving others away, but in inviting them to stand beside you and sometimes offering them the chance to stand up again.